Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well today. I'm sure many of you are aware that last night we had a bit of a ding dong on YouTube. Piers Morgan versus Nick Fuentes. Now, Piers originally said this was just an interview, it wasn't going to be a debate, but it was a debate. He promised not to stack it full of gotchas. Look, it's Piers Morgan. He's a tabloid master, so of course it was full of gotchas. But it created quite a seismic debate, which really summed up a big fracture, a big split in the generations we're seeing in the West, in Western politics at the moment. Now, I think because of this, largely with these debates, they talk past each other. They're always trying to have that clippable moment. There's loads of that already. And then, the online world, so-and-so smashed someone else. Everyone does that 100 times. And most of these debates often go nowhere. But I do think there are things that we can look into this and really learn about the future of the West, about power in the West and the rest of it. And the biggest takeaway in that sense is the clear, different moral framing that was on display from Morgan and Fuentes. This was a showdown of Morgan, who's very much the representative of the post-World War II liberal order. For people like Morgan, the greatest sin one can commit is racism, sexism, bigotry, and so on. And Fuentes represents something new, a sort of hyper-online, young, right-wing, edgelord type mentality, stacked often in irony and so on. And for people like Fuentes, the greatest sin isn't really the bigotry of old. It's more betrayals of your homeland and its intended traditions, as well as demographic change. They see, being pro any of that is the biggest betrayal through their frame of consciousness. Now, a quick takeaway on who won, quote unquote, lets us know all about another key metric that was really at play here, and you can go and check this out for yourself. Virtually all the comments under the video are pro Fuentes. I mean, I went through probably 100 and they're just all pro Fuentes. Most of Twitter is pro Fuentes too. And again, across the online spaces, you're finding that. However, if you Google Piers Morgan, you'll see the legacy media reports are more pro Piers. And this really speaks about sort of the split between legacy media on the one side and online media and the demographics that involves, the people that attracts and so on. It would be a different video entirely, but it's just worth mentioning quickly. Someone like Piers Morgan may well have been set into the online world because it's essentially representative of the legacy mentality coming into the online space. I think we've seen a lot of that over the years. But anyway, let's just break down what happened and what we can truly learn from this, because it was quite seismic, I thought. Now, I tried to watch this as objectively as possible. Let any bias or beliefs I have, just leave them at the door and just watch it neutrally. And for the Stasi, I know Nick Fuentes is a controversial guy. I'm not condoning or promoting anything he's saying. I'm just watching this as purely neutral political analysis. Now, as I said earlier, the first thing to mention here is Nick has massive online support, and that tends to be very aggressive in its support of him. And I often think if you just look online, you never get a true picture. Yeah, some of the clips of Fuentes are dramatic or extreme or funny, but until you really watch him over time, I don't think you can really get a fair overview of who he is and what he's saying. And I think because I'm not a groiper, as they're known, they're basically loyal followers of Fuentes. They're, again, highly edgy, terminally online, often stacked in irony and edgy jokes. And they're all Zoomers, really, so they're quite young. And plus, I don't really like the drama and noise, but they're very combative and so on. But again, they're sort of like the followers of the Joker. Remember that movie with Joaquin Phoenix? They're a bit like that, sort of full of irony and arcane wit and aggression and subversion. But again, I think if you just read what they say, you kind of get a very stacked version. And on the flip side, it's very difficult with someone like Piers Morgan because he's just a shapeshifter by nature. He's taken on many roles in his career. We have to remember that's what he is, really. He's sort of like a political, cultural showman, you could say, who's an expert troll. He's an expert in tabloid content creation. Apparently his company, Uncensored, is looking to sell for 100 million or something like that, which gives you an idea of his talents in creating drama and so on. But, as I think we found out last night with Piers, when you stare into that Fuentes abyss, the Fuentes abyss stares back at you. And I thought this was more revealing about Piers than anything we've ever seen before. So, objectively speaking, general performance, Piers was as you expect him to be in the beginning, just typical Piers, setting up subtle gotchas, subtle narratives to try and catch Fuentes out, mentioning his father and things like that, trying to get him emotional, wrong foot him, and that's just classic, what you'd imagine from Morgan, expert at that sort of thing. However, Nick, I thought, well, it's always difficult with Fuentes because I've watched more and more of him in recent months, and I think many of us just knew him from clips. But I personally think there are 3 Nick Fuenteses I've seen so far, and each one depends upon the energy you give him. So if you're just an average guy chatting, you get many podcasts like this now, they'll just chat to him, who are you, where you from? He's just like an average guy too, seems perfectly affable, polite and all that sort of stuff, just a normal guy. And then you have Fuentes, the sort of political analyst, and normally you need to get him in a sort of deep debate, which isn't combative, but more explorative. And I think he really shines here. I think this, for me, is the best Fuentes. He has quite an encyclopedic knowledge of politics and geopolitics. He understands how power works. He can extrapolate current events to what's going to happen in the future, and so on and so on. I think that's probably, like I say, where he's his strongest. But where he's most famous for is, again, the online, super based and red-pilled, controversial edgelord who'll say the most out there thing. He'll go for the holy cows of the liberal world, issues around race, women, and of course World War II, as we'll get to. It's easy to take him out of context on that, but sometimes he'll purposefully drive for that. But again, I think, for me personally speaking, he's at his worst when he's actually that persona. But that might just be because he doesn't suit me. I don't like the drama and all that. But he is very good with it. And I think some people who are good with it are always going to be massive successes online. Because again, a bit like Piers, they're excellent at driving the views and the controversy and all that sort of stuff. But I think it actually cheapens his message quite a bit. And I thought that came up actually in the debate. And we'll get to that. But in principle, I worry if that will truly translate for him into a broader appeal, because it feels a touch juvenile, sometimes bordering, sometimes going into the cruel. Sometimes people can't see that it's layered in irony and humour and the rest of it, and a lot of it is just terminally online, as I say. But anyway, I think the key dimension of the debate really functioned around World War II. Up to that point, it was relatively, tit for tat, just going back and forth. But it really started to take shape when Piers raised the event that you're not really supposed to talk about on YouTube with regards to the core event of World War II, and on numbers with regards to that. Now, when Piers was pressing Fuentes for numbers in the camps, let's say, Nick was purposefully being hyperbolic, and I'm not the most online literate guy, when it comes to these guys like Fuentes. They're terminally online. I don't know half of the slang they use, but I do know the other half. And even I can see, Fuentes was being purposefully hyperbolic. Maybe it was 10 million, maybe it was 50, and on he goes. And all of that seemed to go straight over Pierce's head, and a lot of people have given Piers a lot of flack for that. But look, Piers is an old guy. He's from the legacy media. He's from the tabloid world. Nick Fuentes is seasoned in years and years of meta-irony and shitposting. And again, this is why I say I'm not sure whether Fuentes will truly translate, because it seems so very online when I was listening to him yesterday. But the point is, this is really the key issue, I think, of sort of liberal boomer and so on, and what really makes Fuentes so controversial. But I personally felt that this was, again, Fuentes at his weakest. I thought he wasn't that strong in this part. I think there are ways he could have dealt with it a bit better, a bit more maturely. For instance, by saying things like, look, he did briefly say this, to be fair to him, but it was really in passing. But say anything like, look, mass murder is terrible no matter what group. It's an awful thing. Nobody defends that. But I have questions I don't feel I can ask. And there are other wars, other genocides. Why do we focus on this one? I think that would have been a more reasonable approach rather than the edgelord stuff, which, again, will work wonders online with his following, but probably not so well when it comes to scaling. Some people, probably think that doesn't matter given the world that's coming and how radicalized and polarized it's going to be. I personally do think it matters. And I think that's probably a flaw of Fuentes, and he'll find it more and more as he grows in popularity. However, I do think Fuentes did turn it round, with arguably what was the kill shot of the whole debate, which is when he mentioned the classic one, which has just grown and grown in recent years, which is, well, why does everybody have to have collective guilt over this? He basically said every European, even Americans, British, who fought against the Germans have to feel bad about this. And if we ever want to have borders, we're immediately evil, we're immediately going to commit a genocide. And we're tired of hating ourselves and not being able to protect ourselves. Piers lost it there. He really did, because up to there he was quite controlled and trying to bait Fuentes and had, if you like, the emotional frame. But he was yelling how that's all a crock of shit again and again and again. He thought, Fuentes got you there. He was too on target, and it was a sign, I felt, that Piers had lost the narrative. As I say, he was a smarty pants up till that point, and then a bit of a kill shot there. And Morgan saying, "Oh, that's all complete nonsense. How dare you?" It's just dishonest. It's just, you don't have to agree with everything Fuentes says to see he's got a point there. I mean, just the other day, Zach Polanski was on Question Time flailing his arms about calling Reform mid-century Germans who are going to, commit a genocide because they want to implement laws around migration. And, Reform aren't even that right-wing. Sorry to break it to you. But it's been this way for decade after decade now. And I think people like Morgan don't realise when they don't give an inch on this, they just create the Nick Fuenteses of the world. You have to be able to see, look, there is an obvious hypocrisy there. You can be anti-genocide and want to have borders in your own country and want to maintain the homogeneity of your own country. That's not evil. That's pretty standard in human history. And again, as Fuentes pointed to later, that's also what Israel does. So all he wants for America is what the average Israeli wants for Israel, and so on. Which again, you might not like Fuentes, but that is a good argument to make. And Morgan doesn't really have any answers to that. Which again, I think this is why they play up the more extreme elements of Fuentes and look for that gotcha clip, because again, it almost just makes everything he says poisoned, tarnished. But I felt with that one, it really summed up not just the debate, but the issue between the boomers and the younger, more radical right-wing Zoomers. And that the boomers don't understand how they've lost the Zoomers, how the ignoring of the obvious hypocrisy, the contradictions have played out with the Zoomer right, and how they are done with it. So you will raise up, these tragic events in history, all of the sort of heart-wrenching experiences of sexism and racism, and someone like Nick Fuentes will laugh in your face. And it can seem exceptionally cruel to the boomer, and even, much of the legacy media types. I think what they don't quite grasp is how lots of these people have felt betrayed for a long time, and they almost don't like your holy cows. I mean, what's that saying? If you kick a child out of the village, he'll burn it down to feel its warmth, something like that. I'm not saying that's the totality of what's going on, but there's something there as a break in the generations where they just don't understand each other anymore, and they can't find a language to really speak. So instead, all you have is basically edgelords coming up, younger edgelords, and Piers, as always, making money off of the fracture, which is what Piers is really doing here, as he's doing always. So really, once that had happened, I think that set the tone for the rest of the debate. Fuentes tended, for my taste, to be a bit too of an online edgelord, over wise elder, pointing towards a deeper, earthier tradition rooted in something sacred that I would like instead, a bit too online, bit edgy, purposefully going to say something outrageous, a sort of an FU. But look, he's 27, he's terminally online. This is what these people are like. For my tastes, doesn't really suit me. But I can see why young people who feel deeply betrayed are drawn to people like Fuentes. They're not really going to buy the worldview of a Morgan. And again, that came through with the conversations on women, where Piers basically showed himself to just be a containment liberal, really masquerading as someone with right-wing views. And again, it's kind of sad in a way, because there are legitimate criticisms to be made of Fuentes' takes on women, because they're pretty much bog-standard red pill takes. And again, Fuentes is terminally online, so a lot of his takes have come from that. And you can sort of see there is an inexperience with women that I think, if you like, a male elder would kind of aid him with and take them away from, if you like, the excesses of the online red pill stuff, which can, in my view, lead into a sort of hatred and anger, the red pill rage, as it's called. To my experience, having some, I went through the red pill thing in my probably late 20s. I learnt a lot from it, and a lot of it was really true. But I realised it is a bit unwell, and for me, it matured into more traditionalist sacred order sentiment, which again, through the Christian understanding, is rooted in love. It's God's love. It's God's order. It's not about hating anyone. You don't have to put anybody down. It's a natural flowing order. Now, again, I speak about this a lot. Our tradition's been destroyed, so you can't blame people for not being able to feel that. I've spent 10 years sort of reading and meditating and contemplating and reading different traditions, and you start to be like, oh, I get it now, and it really adds so much to your life. It's a wonderful thing, really. But again, like most things, it's degenerated into an online fight between feminists and red pill edgelords. But anyway, my point is, it felt to me like a lot of Fuentes' talking points were sort of online theory over real world reality and even Christian tradition. And he's a Catholic, so make of that what you will. But again, you have to be very careful with this stuff, that the authority, if you want, of the God's authority that flows through the male doesn't turn into ego. It's a loving action more than anything. But again, as I say, that wise elder energy doesn't really come across. And instead, it just leads to the classic argument between feminist Piers and sort of based and red-pilled Fuentes. But again, Piers made a massive error in mocking Fuentes. And again, he fell into the abyss of Fuentes and showed himself up more than anything. Piers states he's a Catholic, but he's one of these modern liberal Catholics. And when you're listening to his rhetoric, you can see he's just a liberal. That's all he is. Because he was saying to Fuentes, look, if you'd fallen in love with a woman, and he doesn't realise how damaging that can be for modern men, love doesn't work like it did in 1970. You can still find a good woman, but it's harder out there. Not to mention he was mocking Fuentes for not getting laid. Fuentes is a virgin, as many people know. He's a Catholic. He doesn't believe in sex before marriage. Hasn't found the right woman. And Piers is basically using that line of mocking him for that, which again just sums up Piers as really just traditionally bankrupt. I mean, if you're a Catholic, you should leave Nick to live his own Catholic life and not be promoting him to go out and basically commit sins through the Catholic frame. And also, I've always wondered this, because I'm not exactly a Bible basher type. I'm the sort of esoteric, meditating, prayer, sacred order type. But even I know from reading the New Testament that St. Paul, is completely clear that in life, as a Christian, your service is to God first. In fact, that's your first service. He even says that before marriage. He even says, that should be your life. But if you find you have a sexual desire, then get married, But you don't need to do that. I never know why Fuentes doesn't say that, because it's very clear in the Bible. And anyway, very dishonest again of Piers to take that line, because again, it's just a liberal. That's just a liberal line on things. And again, the same thing with debate on race statistics. Again, very controversial ground, but Nick was making some points about certain groups having higher levels of violence per capita. Piers dragged it into conversations on school shootings, which again, I think they tend to be predominantly white. But again, it's kind of missing the core point there, and of course using one dreadful example to ignore, if you like, the scale of the whole. I thought that was just standard boomer liberalism from Piers there. Doesn't play well online with people who are going to fact check it now for weeks on end and really show that Piers is just wrong about that. But again, bad line of argument from Piers there. So, in principle, conclusions, I could talk about more, but I don't want the video to get too long. I'm already up around 20 minutes. But I thought, Fuentes probably edged that. He, according to the online world, absolutely dominated it. I don't feel that was the case personally. A lot of these things, they're talking past each other. I think Piers will think he won, and Fuentes will think he dominated. But like I say, online, Fuentes is taking his flowers. But in the legacy media, again, Google Piers Morgan, and it will all be Piers Morgan destroys, white nationalist, evil, Nick Fuentes and so on. But I think for me, it's not so much about who won and lost. It's the big takeaway is that there's a total disconnect between the boomer worldview that's dominant and been dominant for so long, but is starting to fade, and a new sort of wild, highly subversive Zoomer movement led by Fuentes, which sums up a sort of generational breakdown. Boomers do not understand their kids nor how to reach them now. They're in different worlds, different consciences, and the extremism, quote unquote, they see in the young, they also don't see that it's down to the huge cultural contradictions that they've set up. the modern Western liberal state that they've backed so much has created the Andrew Tates and the Nick Fuenteses. You can't divorce the two. All these figures are part of their environment. As I say, on a personal level, I would be very surprised to see if Fuentes can actually scale. I think he's too hardcore, too online, too radical. He can be brilliant at times. He can be OTT at times, in my view. He's very funny. He'll do very well online. He's highly confrontational. As I say, he's, again, great online, but I think quite poor for leading mass movements. He's an army of one in many ways. But further to that, I think there's something richer is on offer here. And part of me, as I made a video before, does suspect whether Fuentes is actually being promoted. All of a sudden, he's on all these podcasts, and a lot of them have been softball until this one. And I do wonder if in the post-woke era, this could be a broader play in order to shift the focus back, if you like, on the toxic white male, because many people have got sick of the woke thing. They started to see through it. All the white privilege stuff, it started to fall apart. Even Novara Media, big leftist outlets started to basically leave a lot of the woke stuff behind. The corporate world did too. However, it seems to me that could it be that people like Fuentes, who are very edgy, very aggressive, very combative, are being raised up in an extent, this is just a theory by the way, in order to sort of create a united front against Fuentes and basically by extension the Western rights, because it basically contain everyone in that order. And then you've basically replicated the same dynamic as woke without woke itself. Just a suspicion, that's all I'm saying. I just felt Fuentes' message is a bit edgy, and I thought, this isn't going to scale. So yeah, just my take, and be interested to know what you guys think down below. As always, join the Substack for more stuff, and do subscribe to this channel if you're new, and enjoy the rest of your day.